House Speaker Mike Johnson just said it. The U.S. government shutdown is inevitable. Not possible. Not avoidable. Inevitable. The word lands like a gavel strike in a silent courtroom, echoing far beyond Washington and straight into the lives of millions who rely on a government that is now preparing to go dark. This wasn't whispered in a backroom or leaked by an aide. It was spoken plainly, almost casually, under the bright lights of a film premiere, as cameras rolled and America listened. Picture the scene. Red carpet. Flashing bulbs. A celebration of storytelling and power. And standing there, the man third in line to the presidency calmly explaining that even if the Senate strikes a deal, even if negotiators shake hands and declare progress, the government may still shut down anyway. Not because of ideology. Not because of protest. But because Congress simply cannot move fast enough to stop the clock. That is the part that chills people to the bone. This isn't chaos driven by passion. It's paralysis driven by procedure. A shutdown not born of fiery debate, but of delay, dysfunction, and indifference to who gets hurt along the way. Federal workers watching deadlines creep closer. Immigrant families wondering which services will disappear first. Communities already stretched thin bracing for another avoidable blow. Johnson's words cut through the usual spin.
No deflexión.
No false optimism. Just a stark admission that Washington's machinery is so jammed, so trapped in its own rules and rivalries, that even agreement may arrive too late to matter. A deal could be real. The votes could exist. And still, the lights could go out. For a country that prides itself on strength and stability, that idea feels almost unthinkable. Yet here it is, hanging in the air. The shutdown isn't being threatened. It's being scheduled by inertia. And the question Americans are left with isn't whether leaders see the danger. It's whether they feel it. Because when a speaker shrugs, raise the stakes. The word shutdown sounds abstract until it reaches the kitchen table. Until it shows up in the form of an email sent at midnight, telling a federal worker not to report for duty. Until it means a paycheck frozen in place, bills still due, groceries still needed, rent still unforgiving. For hundreds of thousands of workers, this isn't politics. It's panic. Across the country, families begin doing the math in their heads. How long can we stretch savings? What gets paid first? What gets sacrificed? These are the quiet calculations no press conference ever shows. Veterans waiting on benefits wonder if the systems they served are about to stall. Parents relying on SNAP ask whether help will arrive on time, or at all. Daycares, clinics, housing offices, all suddenly caught in limbo because Washington couldn't beat a clock everyone knew was ticking. Then there are the visible symbols. National parks padlocked, gates shut, signs taped over with bureaucratic apologies. Tourists turned away. Local economies that depend on those visitors instantly squeezed. It's a reminder that when government stops, it doesn't disappear neatly. The shock ripples outward, touching small towns, service workers, and businesses that never cast a vote in Congress but still pay the price for its dysfunction. And hanging over all of it is the anxiety. A low, constant hum of uncertainty that settles into daily life. People refreshing news feeds. Group chats lighting up with worry. Immigrant communities, already used to living one policy shift away from instability, feeling that familiar tightening in the chest. When systems fail, it's always the most vulnerable who feel it first and the longest. Now contrast that with the view from Washington. Closed-door meetings. Carefully worded statements. Politicians arguing not about whether harm will occur, but who will take the blame when it does. For those inside the Capitol, a shutdown is a tactic, a leverage point, a headline to maw. Frame the legislative impasse as dramatic conflict. GOP hardliners versus moderates, Senate Democrats locking horns with House Republicans, and the procedural chaos that leaves funding in limbo. Use contrast. Senate actually reaches a compromise, but the House is out of session until Monday, meaning a shutdown is likely anyway. Purpose. Build antagonist forces. Partisanship, paralysis, procedural rule clocks. Cliffhanger. But the true twist was not obvious on the surface. Mike Johnson did not arrive at this moment as a bomb thrower or a provocateur. He arrived as a believer in order, in rules, in the quiet power of institutions to hold a nation together even when its people are tearing themselves apart. And now, standing at the center of a fractured Congress, he finds himself carrying a contradiction that may define his speakership, a man who insists he does not want a shutdown, presiding over a system that seems determined to force one anyway. Johnson's dilemma is not ideological simplicity. It is collision. On one side, conservative purists demand confrontation, viewing shutdowns not as failures, but as proof of resolve. To them, compromise is weakness, delay is strategy, and pain is leverage. On the other side, a country exhausted by dysfunction, watching deadlines approach and wondering why governing feels harder than ever. Johnson stands between these forces, absorbing pressure from both, knowing that whichever way he moves, someone will accuse him of betrayal. Behind closed doors, Johnson has been clear about one thing. He does not believe a shutdown helps anyone. Not federal workers. Not families. Not the credibility of Congress itself. He has argued that chaos is not conservatism and paralysis is not principle. He speaks about responsibility, about stability, about the long-term cost of turning governance into a recurring crisis. But belief alone does not move legislation. Procedure does. And procedure, in this moment, is a trap. House rules require 72 hours for members to review the full text of major legislation before a vote. It is a safeguard designed to prevent rush decisions and hidden provisions. In calmer times, it is a mark of transparency and trust. In a crisis, it becomes a countdown timer that no press conference can stop. Even if the Senate reaches a deal tonight, even if negotiators agree on numbers and language, the House clock does not care. It keeps running, indifferent to consequences. Johnson. The countdown, Senate deal versus House reality. The deal arrives the way hope often does in Washington, late and fragile. In the Senate, negotiators finally bridge the gap, hammering out a compromise to temporarily fund Homeland Security and keep key departments running. Statements are drafted. Sources whisper that the worst has been avoided. For a brief moment, the Capitol exhales, convinced that reason has won and the shutdown will be stopped just in time. But the relief is premature. Because across the Capitol, the House is quiet. Members are gone. Flights have been booked. The chamber that must act next is not in session, and the clock does not pause for optimism. The irony is brutal and unmistakable. A deal exists, yet it cannot be used. Agreement without timing is meaningless. As word spreads, the mood shifts from cautious celebration to disbelief. Reporters scramble, refreshing schedules, confirming what sounds impossible. Yes, there is a path forward. Yes, the votes likely exist. And yes, the House still cannot vote. Procedure stands between solution and survival, an invisible wall no amount of rhetoric can scale. Inside offices, staffers work phones at a frantic pace. Can members return early? Can rules be bent? Can time be bought? Each question runs into the same answer. The 72-hour requirement looms, unyielding. Even an emergency cannot erase it. Even consensus cannot outrun it. The system is moving exactly as designed, and that design is now pushing the country toward the edge. Outside the halls of power, the news breaks in waves. Headlines flash across screens. Push alerts buzz in pockets. The phrase "shutdown imminent" becomes unavoidable. Newsrooms light up as producers reshuffle rundowns and anchors prepare to explain, again, why government failure has become routine. Cable panels fill with arguments about blame while viewers stare at the bottom of the screen, waiting for certainty that never comes. Inevitable shutdown unfolds. Morning arrives with a hollow echo. The Capitol, which just yesterday seemed alive with the machinery of government, now feels like a silent stage. Departmental doors are locked, signs taped to entrances, announcing the impossibility of service. Federal workers shuffle through empty hallways, clutching notices that read, "Furloughed effective immediately." Emails ping with subject lines no one wants, "Pay delayed, services suspended, pending." The weight of inevitability presses on every desk, every office, every inbox. This is not a drill. This is the United States of America, halted by its own rules. Outside, national parks that normally swell with families, tourists, and laughter stand eerily still. Gates are chained. Visitor centers dark. A ranger in a uniform that once symbolized service now holds a pamphlet in hand, unsure whether the trail ahead is open. "I've worked here for 20 years, she whispers to a small group turned away at the entrance. "I never thought I'd have to tell people they can't enter, because our government stopped paying me." Pictures of empty trails and locked monuments circulate on social media, shared with hashtags like #ShutdownUSA and #WhereIsCongress. The internet buzzes, not with celebration, but disbelief. Across cities, federal offices lie dormant. A veteran calls his local benefits office repeatedly, each time met with the same automated message: "Due to a lapse in appropriations, this office is closed." His hands tremble as he explains to his wife, "They're shutting everything down. Everything we relied on." At the same time, a single mother checks her child's SNAP account, heart sinking as the pending benefits read, "Processing delayed." Cafeterias, once filled with workers' chatter, are empty. Phones are silent. America feels smaller, quieter, suspended in uncertainty. Meanwhile, the social media storm ignites. Social shockwaves and power plays. By midday, the shutdown had transformed from a political footnote into a national conversation, one that no screen, no feed, and no conversation could escape. Hashtags exploded across social media. #ShutdownReality, #CongressFails, #WhereIsWashington. Each post, tweet, and share amplified the sense that the country was holding its breath, watching an institution it depended on crumble in real time. Newsrooms fed the frenzy, cutting between live reports of furloughed workers, blocked services, and locked offices, while pundits debated endlessly about who was to blame. The air was thick with accusation, outrage, and frustration. Conservative commentators doubled down, framing the shutdown as a necessary correction. Sometimes the country must endure short-term pain to preserve long-term principle, one anchor said, his voice calm but resolute, eyes fixed on charts showing federal spending and debt. Republican voters retweeted with fervor, posting images of the national debt juxtaposed with shuttered offices, portraying themselves as the guardians of fiscal responsibility. Yet even within those communities, unease simmered. Families with federal employees were still paying the price, unable to ignore the human cost that balanced the ideological argument. Democrats, by contrast, framed the shutdown as a deliberate act of obstruction. Clips went viral, a veteran, waiting weeks for his benefits, shaking his head as he recounted lines at a government office, a single mother explaining the grocery bills she could no longer pay on time. The party leaned into these stories, highlighting the tangible suffering that unfolded as a result of partisan gridlock. Memes circulated of empty park benches, locked doors, and paused programs, each one a visual indictment of dysfunction. Every share, every comment, every retweet was a signal. The public was watching, judging, and reacting. Turning point, moral argument and reflection. Amid the fury, frustration, and viral outrage, a quieter question begins to emerge. What does all of this reveal about leadership, about governance, and about the responsibilities we owe one another as citizens? The shutdown, as devastating as its immediate consequences, exposes more than procedural failures. It exposes the human cost of neglecting duty, the fragility of trust, and the stakes of a system meant to serve millions yet falters under the weight of politics. At its core, this is not about party lines. It is about the dignity of every person affected by decisions made or delayed in Washington. Mike Johnson's predicament illustrates the tension between principle and pragmatism. A leader cannot simply will the system to function, but he can choose how to respond to its failures. His reluctance to trigger the shutdown, his acknowledgement of procedural limits, and his navigation between conservative purists and a fractured Congress underscore a fundamental truth. Leadership is not always about victories, it is about responsibility. It is about standing in the storm, absorbing criticism, and making decisions with awareness of their human consequences. In these moments, the character of those in power becomes inseparable from the impact on those they govern. The shutdown also casts a spotlight on public responsibility. Citizens, too, are participants in the democratic experiment, not passive observers. Awareness, engagement, and accountability are crucial when the mechanisms of governance falter. Social outrage, protests, and solidarity, seen in viral clips, in lines outside government offices, in communities pooling resources, demonstrate that democracy thrives not only through legislation but through active, compassionate participation. The moral weight of governance is shared. When the state stumbles, the response of the people can either magnify despair or channel it into constructive action. 9. Conclusion and call to action, 300 words. Summary. Answer the critical takeaway. What must Americans do in response to this shutdown narrative? Encourage civic engagement, balanced media literacy, and constructive participation. End with a powerful call to subscribe, share experiences, and stay informed, positioning the audience as part of the democratic story.